The date is October 20th, 2005. We're at 2313 Rugby Road. The veteran we are interviewing is Michael Edward Gratton. He was born March 11th, 1951. The people present is Erica Nevins, Jessica Underwood, Lucille Nevins, and Michael Gratton. We're working with Cyber School for the Arts. The war he fought in was Vietnam and Persian Gulf War. His branch of service was U.S. Marine Corps. His rank was Master Sergeant. He served in Camp. The place he served in was Okinawa, Vietnam, Korea, Cuba, Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Okay. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted after I graduated from high school.
And how old were you?
I was 18 years old.
Why did you decide to enlist?
Back in 1969 when I enlisted, everybody, all young single men were required to serve. And so I made up my mind I was going to enlist in the Marine Corps. So I graduated from high school, worked for my first summer, and then I went on active duty. My brother was in the Army. I wanted to do what I wanted.
Okay. How did your family react?
My parents were very angry. They didn't find out about it until over 2 weeks after I enlisted. And it was a different kind of situation. I was living about 60 miles away from my family at the time I enlisted. So I enlisted on the delayed entry program in July, but I did not leave to go to boot camp until September. Mom and Dad didn't find out about it until more than 2 weeks after I enlisted.
Okay. What service branch were you in?
I was in the United States Marine Corps.
Okay. Tell me about your first days in boot camp for training.
First days in boot camp are, you're asking yourself, did I really ask for this? There was, you fly on an airplane from, I flew on an airplane from Fargo, North Dakota to San Diego, California. And I stood at attention in San Diego International Airport for about 2.5 hours until everybody was there. Then we got on a bus and they took us down to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego. And you were up all night. There was no walking. You ran everywhere. They issued you your clothes and you put them all in a big sea bag. You hooked it over your arm and you ran everywhere. And at about 4 a.m. you got to lay down for about 30 minutes. Then they shook your rack, threw you out of the tents, and you started all over again. And that was the beginning of 14 weeks of boot camp.
How did it feel to be there?
Very stressful. It was designed to be very stressful. You're always running. You're doing lots of physical training. You're getting shots, for medical purposes. You have classes. You do lots of close order drill. And you are always under pressure. And it's designed that way to help teach you.
Was it what you expected it to be?
Most of it was. The first couple of nights I had doubts in my mind, but I had known former Marines and they had told me about boot camp. And some of them even tried to talk me out of it. They told me all the bad stuff. I felt that I went into it prepared because I knew what to expect. And so I just worked harder at it, and it was worth it. It was worth it.
Do you remember your instructors?
Oh yes. I had 3 drill instructors. My senior drill instructor was Gunnery Sergeant Zwak. Second instructor was Staff Sergeant Taylor. And the junior instructor was Sergeant Heaps, first degree black belt.
Okay, which wars did you serve in?
I served during the Vietnam War, the Vietnam conflict. Uh, when I enlisted, during the years that I enlisted, it was the latter part of the war, so things were changing a lot. I did not go over as a regular line unit. I attended what they called the embassy duty school, and I went over with orders to the American embassy in Saigon. And out of my 2.5 years in country, I did get to work in the embassy for almost 4 months.
Okay, where did you go exactly?
While I was in country during that tour, during my tour in the Marine Corps, I served in many different countries. My first overseas tour was in Okinawa, Japan, and then we went up to the mainland Japan. When I served in Vietnam, I was primarily in Yadien province, down around Saigon, where I provided security for different organizations and different units. I did have trips up to Long Binh province, up to Tu Duc province, and up to Pleiku province, where we had several instances during the offensive of 1972. Then after I left Vietnam, I came back to the States. I was in the States for almost 4 months, then I went to Cuba for the first time. And I was down there about 6 months with Special Mission Forces. And after Cuba, back to the States, to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and several stateside assignments.
Okay, what were your thoughts when you arrived at these places?
Very interesting, and I guess one of the main ones that we're talking about being Vietnam. Because of my assignment, I traveled very different from most of the Marines. My first tours overseas, I went on military aircraft that were chartered, and I wore a uniform, and basically the green uniform that the Marines used at that time. When I went to Vietnam, because I was assigned to the embassy, I went in basically as a civilian. As far as anybody looking in the airport at us, I was a civilian. I used an official passport. I wore civilian clothes, and as far as they were concerned, I was a civilian, and they had to keep their hands off me and let me through their security and get me back where I wanted to be. After I arrived there, the uniform, part of the time we wore uniforms, part of the time we wore civilian clothes.
Tell me about a couple of your most memorable experiences.
I had a lot of them. So my first typhoon in a ship in between Okinawa, Japan and the mainland Japan. And we had some very severe typhoons. We were not allowed out on the deck after a while. So this year when we've seen so many of the severe storms down in the Caribbean, I've been on board ship in storms like that, and so it was a learning experience. Tanks slid around, slapped around in the decks, below decks, and you were cooped up inside cramped compartments because you couldn't get out on deck for fear of being washed overboard. When I came back from Westpac, Westpac is a military Marine Corps term meaning the West Pacific. When I came back from Westpac that first time, I went through schools in Washington, D.C. and Arlington, Virginia. And I got to see had opportunities to work with a lot of security situations that most Marines don't get to participate with. Let's take a break for a second. Among some of the memorable experiences we had, I enjoyed my time in the Marine Corps. When I enlisted, I was going to do 4 years and get out, go to school, become an engineer. And while I was working on my 3rd year in Vietnam, I changed my mind. I re-enlisted and decided I was going to make a career out of the Marine Corps and see some of the world. I was single. I got to travel a lot, and a lot of opportunities became available to me because I was single. When I came back from Vietnam, I went down to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and from there down to Cuba. Cuba was a very restrictive situation. There's 47 square miles of base. It's a naval base, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and it is surrounded by one of the densest minefields in the world. And every so often the Cubans try and play games and put pressure on us. They're wanting us to give up the base. Most of the time it's quiet and sedate, and I had an opportunity to go to school at night while I was down there. The white sands and the beaches are beautiful for swimming. They have certain areas allocated for swimming. Some people, if you're qualified for open water swimming, they could get out into the open ocean. And I used to have fun because in my platoon we had a fisherman. And an example, one of my lance corporals was from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Another one of my lance corporals was from San Antonio, Texas. And I was on duty one day, and we had a white command building up on top of the hill off the beach and on one part of the island, and we called it the White House. That was our command center. I was staff duty that day, and it was quiet. And two of my lance corporals were down fishing in the open water in a little rowboat. Patchett, he's from Minnesota. He's a good fisherman. He knows all about it. The Marine that was from San Antonio was not used to fishing, and he was wanting to learn. So they're down there nice and quietly fishing in the bay. And all of a sudden I hear all this screaming and hollering going on down there. I ran over to look over the hill to see what's happening down there in case there was something wrong. And what had happened is Patchett had gotten a little baby shark on his hook. And he popped that fish up in the air, and it landed in the boat, and it was jumping around and snapping. And the Marine from San Antonio, who didn't like to fish that well anymore anyway, was standing on the edge of the boat, just about ready to fall in the water to get away from this little baby shark that's snapping around trying to jump around and get him. And it looked like Laurel and Hardy at it. I mean, it was a perfect match. It was a real comical situation. And you look back in days and you think of things like that, you know. And we enjoyed it. I enjoyed my tour down there. We had a few warm situations with the Cubans, but generally it was a good tour.
Okay, were you awarded any medals or citations?
Yes, I have several awards that I've gotten from different countries. My last one that I received when I retired was right after Desert Storm, because I was the chief instructor and later the non-commissioned officer in charge of the Marine Corps New Equipment Training Team. I was awarded the Navy Commendation Medal for running the school and prepping the Marines to go into battle in Iraq.
How did you feel when awarded them?
You have feelings of gratitude, and you have to remember that you're not the only one that's there. It's, you know, it's people working with you that help you do things. The Marine Corps is a very tight-knit organization. It's like part of your family. I wouldn't have gotten that award if my men had not supported me and worked with me and helped me. I led them to do what we had to do. We accomplished our mission. Our mission was a very major contributing factor during Desert Storm, and it helped our men. The tank crewmen come home alive. And we always had that in the back of our head, that if we don't do our job right, they might not come home. So there was a lot of pressure on our people to do it right.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
I was fortunate in that during that period of time, during Desert Storm, Desert Shield, I was stationed at the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center in 29 Palms, California. So we would go out to the field, but normally not more than a week at a time. So I'd have a week in the rear and a week in the field. And I got to see my family while I was back in the rear. So every other week, I usually got to see them for several nights. During earlier periods when I was overseas, we used mail. Most time was writing. I can remember a few times we used cassette tapes, and Mom and Dad used to send me cassette tapes from home, and you usually ended up borrowing somebody's cassette player to listen to them, and they would send us care packages. My family learned quickly, between my brother and I, in our tours in Vietnam, that care packages don't do well in boxes. My 19th birthday, my birthday cake came almost 2 months late, and the joke of it was that I had a picture of me sitting beside the back of my tank, leaned up against the track, and I had my cake sitting in front of me with the candles burning on it. It was pretty good. It was chocolate cake with this greenish colored frosting on it. Just kind of struck me funny. It was green. Well, when I wrote home to thank Mom for it, she said that it wasn't supposed to be green. That was white chocolate, white frosting. And I don't know, we thought it tasted good at the time. There's lots of sugar in it. And when you haven't had homemade goodies like that, it was nice. My folks used to send us chocolate chip cookies packed in popcorn in coffee cans, and they would come through. If you sent them in a box, the box would usually be crushed, and you'd end up with bags full of crumbs with chocolate chips in amongst them. So the best way to send them was to put them in Folgers coffee cans and pack them with popcorn. Now the popcorn was a little bit stale, but it still tasted good. And the cookies were real good. They didn't get all broken up. So we learned many different ways of shipping back and forth. My last tour overseas in Okinawa, after I was married, my wife and I had worked out a deal where we put money aside every month, and we had one phone call a month. And we would coordinate the dates when it would happen, because she wanted to hear my voice. And she was back in Illinois with my 3 children. And we tried tapes a little bit, and my youngest daughter was, she was only about 3 years old then. She got so confused over the cassettes, how Daddy got in this box, and she didn't understand it. And but once a month, we'd make a short phone call, and we'd get to hear each other's voice. And when she called, or when she would call me, it would be about 3 o'clock in the morning our time. So as long as I was on the island of Okinawa, then she would call. During periods when I went to Korea or other islands, then of course, needless to say, we couldn't talk.
Okay, what was the food like? What was the food like?
Okay, and now I'm one, I love to eat. I like food from many different countries, and I love food from the Far East. I spent a lot of months in the Far East, and I still love Oriental food. Very tasty. Periods when you're out in the field, we ate MREs, or C rations, were the old ones. Those were the cans that were in the boxes. I think the oldest meal I've ever eaten had a date of 1948 on the box. And it was still good. It's just, it tasted like regular lima beans, ham and lima beans. But I am one, I've always learned, I like to learn to meet some of the local people whenever I went to different countries. And because of that, I think it opened up several opportunities where I got to eat a lot of the local food and learn a lot of different things.
Did you have plenty of supplies?
Most of the time we did. We had times when we ran out of supplies. One in particular that always comes to the top of my head was when I was running out of camouflage uniforms. And 1973, Yat province in Vietnam, in 72 and 73, a lot of the U.S. forces were coming back to the States. And we were having hard times getting uniforms. And we used to do what we called scavenge runs. We'd go out to units that were getting ready to come back to the States, and we'd talk them out of uniforms and supplies, and get parts from them. And it kept ourselves supplied with equipment while we were waiting for our regular supplies to come through. During the early parts of 1972, we ran into some real problems trying to get certain supplies in country. Most of the U.S. forces were coming back to the United States, and we were staying behind. So we were getting equipment from other organizations, Air Force and Army, and we got armored cars. We had two of the first V-100 Commando armored cars that the Marine Corps ever had. And we got them from 7th Air Force out of Tonsinook Air Force Base. They were coming back to the States, so they let us have shoes, boots. We got boxes of new boots. We got boxes of new uniforms. And we were having problems getting them. And our uniforms were getting old. But that was about one of the worst times I can think of trying to get supplies. Usually, I will say that what I've learned over the years, in the 20 years I was in, the Marine Corps learned a lot about keeping the troops supplied and learned to do a much better job of it. And I never ran into problems like that later.
Was there something special you did for good luck?
There was different things. You never let a woman touch your dog tags. Was an old one. I don't know, that was one of the few that I was superstitious about. My wife has never touched my dog tags. And even after I've retired, she refuses to touch them now. But it was considered bad luck. I got that somewhere when I was a junior troop. It was considered bad luck if a woman touched your dog tags. Just get rid of them and get a new pair.
Was there any entertainment?
There was entertainment in different areas. I almost got to go to a Bob Hope show once. Bob Hope played at Tonsinook Air Force Base once. And I was looking forward to it. It was during one of the last years before Tonsinook left. And I wanted to go to it. And then I ended up having to go a different direction. I had to work. And I never got to go. But there were different types of entertainment. In most of your bases overseas, they'll have movie theaters on board on the base. In Cuba, for example, there's free movies. They have outdoor movie theaters set up. Some on Marine Corps Hill and some down on the Navy side. But these are big, they're like drive-in theaters, except they're positioned with the bleachers in the sides of the mountains. So you're sitting in these real nice bleachers that go up the sides of the mountains, and you don't have people in front of you and stuff. You can see well. And they would play, the USO would have, send movies down. They had the Armed Forces Motion Picture Service. And of course they had the military exchanges there where you could go buy things. When I was in Nam and when I was in Okinawa and Japan the first times, there was what's called the Pacific Exchange mail order catalog. And that was a big thing for me. I was 19 years old when I went over there, and I wanted a big stereo system. and I bought a massive stereo system and sent it home to the States. I didn't see it for 2.5 years when I finally came home. But I had 3 reel-to-reel tape players. I had 2 8-track tape players. I had 2 cassette tape players. I had a 2-channel turntable. I had a 4-channel turntable. And my system would put out about 400 watts, so I could crank the volume up and I could watch the windows disintegrate.
Okay. What did you do when on leave?
Very often when I went on leave, I went home to the United States. Or I went home. I'm originally from North Dakota, and I have family up there. And quite often I went home to North Dakota and would visit family.
Was there anything interesting that you saw while you was in service, like when you went to different places?
Yes, I'd say every country had something. I went to a lot of the places, like they had aquariums in Okinawa. There was historical areas. The first time I was in Okinawa, Okinawa was a protectorate of the United States at that time. It was still left over from World War II. And they had a lot of historical stuff about the battles that went on Okinawa, at the military bases. The second time I went to Okinawa, it had been on its own, and Okinawa was described as a Hawaii of the East. It is a very popular vacation place for the Japanese. On one side of the island, they had a lot of U.S. bases still, but on another side, what they called the China Beach side of the island, they had very expensive hotels and rooms that were $1,000 a night, and beautiful beaches. And lots of Japanese would come down there and vacation. Well, we got opportunities to go there, and I always made a point. I wanted to see some of the local things. Like I love some of the tapestry and china from Japan. So I went to some of the places where they actually blew glass bowls and got to watch them do it, things like that. And I bought a lot of souvenirs and brought home. When I was stationed in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, I went down to what we called a Caribbean cruise. We went into went into Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for a few days on an operation down there. Then we went to Puerto Rico, and we did an operation down there, and we got to meet some of the locals. I worked with Dutch Marines there, and it was quite interesting. Then after we finished that, we went down to Curacao, Dutch West Indies, and we spent 4 days of liberty in the Dutch West Indies. You see all these fancy cruise ships coming in there, and we got to go over these really old, they were old forts, Caribbean forts, and lots of tourist sites and stuff. And the Dutch Marines I was working with were stationed on Curacao, and they took us around and showed us lots of things. When we went into, like in the Philippines, we got to see that a little bit. I didn't do much in the Philippines. I didn't get out very much there, or in Guam. Those were mostly in transit type stops, periods that I was there. In Korea, after we had got through with our operations, we did operations through the countryside. We did an amphibious assault on the beach. But after we got through with our training, we worked with the ROC Marines and with the British. And when we got through, we got to go out on liberty, and we bought souvenirs, and we got to meet some of the people and eat in some of the local establishments. And it was interesting. It's a learning experience. I'll never have that opportunity again in my life. Things like that were quite enjoyable.
Okay, take a break. Was there anything funny or an unusual event that you remember?
I had lots of unusual events. Some good, some not so good. I enjoyed my events down on the beaches in the Caribbean. I've seen both sides of the Pacific Ocean. I enjoyed that. Okinawa, we went on the beaches on weekends during my last tour in Okinawa. When I was not aboard ship, I did office work. I did operations chief of the Armored Assault Battalion at Camp Hague. Well, normally I would take one weekend a month, and I would take a day off. I bought a 10-speed Huffy bike, and I would ride around the island. And something the Japanese do that we don't, it's interesting compared to our country, is they will have hot coffee machines. You buy cans of coffee, and they are very heavy with sugar and very strong coffee. And they have these alongside the road. So you can be running around and riding the bike, you pull over the side of the road, drop 100 yen into the machine, pick up one or two cans of hot coffee, go down to a food stand, pick up some food, drop down to the beach and have a picnic. And I used to do that. It was enjoyable. It was fun to get out on once a weekend. I loved spy rigging when I was in Okinawa. Spy rigging is when you're hanging off a strap on the bottom of a helicopter, and they pick you up. They'll pick you up as a team. They use this device to extract people or insert people into certain places, and you have a strap that attaches on the back of your harness. You've got all your equipment, your weapons and stuff, and you're hanging off the bottom of a Huey helicopter, and you're flying about 70 or 80 miles an hour up in the air. And
did anyone ever fall off?
not when I was around.
Okay.
They had new styles of equipment, and they're very safety conscious, and it's designed that way for safety of the troops. But we would fly out and we would practice extractions, and because as an operations chief, you may have to go in with a reconnaissance unit. For that reason, we would go out and we would practice every so often. We would do rappelling with ropes, climbing up and down mountains and hills, and going down the sides of towers, practicing rappelling with ropes. It was experiences you don't get elsewhere. And I used to really enjoy those.
Did you keep a diary?
Normally, no. I did work for part of my period. I worked with a lot of classified, so no diaries. We did keep logbooks for certain things. A logbook is like a diary for the Marine Corps. It tells what happened during a period of time. But I never kept a personal diary.
Okay. After service, do you recall the day your service ended?
Yes. I felt kind of lost. Now, after 22 years, 4 months, and 13 days, I became a civilian. Now, what helped me get reoriented was that I had already found a job in California. The people I work with now flew me from California to Dayton. I spent 4 days in Dayton. They paid for my room up in the Hilton, and paid for my rental car and paid for all my meals. And well, I had my interviews. Then I flew back to California, and about a week later they notified me that I had been hired, and I was already in the process of moving my family back to Illinois and ultimately here to Dayton during that period of time. So after spending almost all of my adult life in the Marine Corps, all of a sudden I have to back off and slack off a little bit. I am a technical writer now. This is a job I learned in the Marine Corps. And I go home at night. I don't work with explosives anymore. I still do jobs. I work with hydraulics and electronics and heavy equipment. I tear things apart and I write about them. But the possibility of imminent danger is not always there, so it's a lot quieter. It's a very big change after 22 years.
What did you do in the days and weeks afterwards?
When I first got out, I took what we call terminal leave. Leave is vacation. When you're on active duty, you earn 30 days of vacation or leave per year. I had not been able to go because of Desert Storm and my previous assignments. I had not been able to go on leave for quite a while, so I had almost 90 days of leave on the books. I took 88 days of leave in conjunction with my retirement. So I came to Ohio from California. My family was already here. They'd gotten a rental house. And I spent 2 weeks of vacation just getting my family set up and kind of relaxing, just chilling out, getting used to the civilian environment. One of the things I did within my first year, I started using my GI Bill to go back to school. During my 22 years in the military on active duty, I would take classes at different duty stations. And one of the problems with moving a lot is that you couldn't finish, you couldn't get a degree someplace. Most of the colleges wanted you there, going to their school for 1 or 2 years before they would accept credits from other schools. So I had credits from many different schools all over the world. I went to school in Cuba, I went to school in North Carolina, I went to school in Virginia, went to school in California, but no one college would accept those credits until I got here. So we kind of laugh. It took me 23 years to get my associate degree. Then it took me 2 more years to get 2 bachelor's degrees. So those were some major projects I wanted to finish. I was the first one in my generation, in my family, to get a college diploma.
Was your education supported by the GI Bill?
Yes, yeah, as we were just discussing. The GI Bill paid for it. In my situation, the GI Bill changed a lot from when I enlisted until I retired. For example, in the 1970s, if I had gotten out of the Marine Corps when my first enlistment was up, I could have gotten several years worth of college. I could have gotten up to 6 years of college at that point, according to the paperwork I had. When I retired this time, after 22 years of service, I was only able to get 3 years of college, and that was it.
Did you make any close friendships while in the service?
Oh yes, make hundreds of them. We still, there's a few we call back and forth. We'll make phone calls and talk back and forth. We have, of course, Christmas cards or your seasons. We remember birthdays and sometimes just off-the-wall visits. Especially my first 5 years or so that I got out after I retired, because I had some friends that were stationed at Fort Knox, Kentucky, training at the U.S. Army Armor Center. We would drive down there and visit, or they would come up here and visit, and so we had some real good times. They're like family, like your extended family.
Did you join a veterans organization?
Yes, I belong to 3 veterans organizations: the American Legion, the Veterans Administration, the VA, and the Disabled American Veterans, the DAV, or Disabled Veterans of America.
What kind of activities do you do in the organization?
Well, I don't normally participate. I quit drinking many years ago. I quit drinking in 1984. A lot of the clubs of the veterans organizations are set up have family functions, and they'll have activities. They'll have entertainment. but they're all usually around alcohol. I do not desire to be around it, so I choose not to participate that way. I do visit with many of them. I have friends in different organizations, but I don't go out to the parties and stuff. That's just not me anymore.
Okay. What did you go on to do as a career after the war?
My original plan was, after I graduated from high school, back then everybody was required to serve, put time into service. So if you didn't enlist, you got drafted. So I was going to go I was going to enlist for 4 years because I thought it would be a better education. And then I was going to get out and go to college, and I wanted to become an engineer. I wanted it very much, more than anything. But after about 4 years, I changed my mind, and I re-enlisted. And I let the Marine Corps teach me. I can do many things while I was in the Marine Corps that an engineer does. But all my schooling was paid for by the Marine Corps. And so in a way, I feel like I accomplished a lot of what I wanted. And I know I definitely enjoyed my career.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yes.
How?
I am very pro-military. My personal opinion, I think we should still have the draft. Because I have seen it throughout my career, how a young man or woman that decides they want to go in the military, it helps them grow up. And when they left the military, even after 2 years or 3 years, they went on to school and they did a lot more in the civilian world with their life. So it was more personally satisfying. And it helped them grow up. That was part of the military.
How did your service and experiences affect your life?
It had a lot of effect on my life. It caused me to not get married and have children till a lot later. A lot of my friends were getting married at 19, 20, 21 years old. I was 28. I was almost 28 when I got married. And so my children are much younger than, say, my brother's children, for example. There's several years difference between them. And I felt that I was a lot more grown up and a lot more responsible by the time I did get married. I felt that I appreciate the things we have here in the United States. Well, under most normal circumstances, you don't have to worry about getting shot just because you want to go to your church, because you want to you express your religion or not express your religion for the way you want. We have our normal crime, but I want to call it normal crime, but a lot of other countries have that, but then they also have prejudices that, where they will they get away with shooting people just because they think differently than we do. My years overseas taught me a lot. Made me appreciate what we have, made me appreciate our schools. People ask me what I think about a certain politician. I says, I won't tell them an opinion. I'll tell them my opinions are my opinions. I fought for this country, so my opinions are mine. Your opinions are yours. That is your right. I helped fight to give you those rights. And I have very strong feelings on that.
Is there anything you would like to add to that we have not covered in this interview?
No, I just want I think. I feel honored that I was asked.
You're welcome.